What up, Freediver fans? Jonathan here with you guys today, and I have CJ Duffy from Neritic, and we are going to go through all of his products and talk a little bit about the history of Neritic and kind of where it came from. So yeah, dive right in.
The first thing I want to talk about is when Neritic started. I used to be sponsored by a gentleman named Carl Keller. He was a father figure to me.
Nice.
Worked with him for about 2 years developing his brand of Polespears, and salty and sweet at the same time. When he passed, I was very close with the family, and I actually asked his son for the blessings on carrying it on and doing it underneath my own brand and my own name, and he gave me full blessings. So I started to make Polespears one at a time because we had a ton of people asking, where can I get a heavy duty Polespear?
Right.
There was a void in the marketplace,
For
so
sure.
I really just wanted to make sure that people had something to go over to the Bahamas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how it really started. But they weren't blue back then. They were originally
like a gunmetal silver color.
correct. Yeah, and so it wasn't even big blue at the time. It was just a Neritic Polespear, and it wasn't until maybe a couple months later when we started ramping up and getting into more of the manufacturing stages that we started saying, okay, well, now this is Big Blue. So then it kind of created its name of its own.
Okay, so this was the first one. Big
Yeah.
Blue was like the original Neritic. And Neritic?
Neritic.
Okay.
Neritic.
Neritic.
Neritic,
Okay,
yeah.
so where did that come from?
Yeah, so I actually was sitting in class. I'm a marine biology major, and the word Neritic came up on the screen, much like benthic being for the bottom, pelagic being for some of those pelagic species that we talk about in the open ocean. The Neritic Zone actually encompasses a ton of different zones, the epipelagic, mesopelagic, benthic, all of it, right? It's from where the water starts to touch the coastal all the way to the abyssal plain. So pretty cool.
What is the abyssal plain?
The abyssal plain is where you have that drop off, right? In Finding Nemo, it's where that trench is, right? You start having that really deep water.
Now you're talking my language. I can.
Yeah, talk Finding Nemo. Everyone gets it, right? So that's where it came from, and it was pretty cool.
So it's basically the entire ocean, like from the deeps of the trench all the way up to the beach.
Where the deep of the trench would start, right? Where that abyssal drop off begins, right? And so I coined the term Neritic Diver because us as divers, we're never going to dive deeper than the Neritic Zone, and we're never going to escape the Neritic Zone when we're all the way up to the surface. All of you who are divers, you are Neritic divers, and you don't even know it.
Nice. That's awesome. And the logo itself, you guys came up with like the kind of thought process.
So I'm an Aquarius.
Okay.
The waves is the Aquarius sign, but since the Neritic Zone is underneath the ocean, you have the squiggles underneath the waves. So that's kind of where that came from.
So you're being all thoughtful and things.
Well, it was after a couple beers and a couple sketches and a lot of throwing it away and tossing it around and stuff like that.
Very cool, man. We started with the Big Blue. We had this, big bad to the bone Polespear. Let's kind of talk about that real quick and the features and benefits as to why and what. Why would somebody pick, or what's awesome about this big Polespear? So
3/4 inch diameter Polespear, aluminum. One of the biggest things I love about aluminum, and we have the conversation aluminum versus composite, right? It's a big conversation.
Absolutely.
One of the things I love about aluminum is when you are out in the Bahamas and you're stranded and 50 miles away from land, and you have a big fish rock up. Sometimes you will get an aluminum bent section. The beauty of aluminum, you get to bend it back, right? Put it in a rod holder, you're not left stranded. We are, hand-to-hand combat when we're talking about Polespears up underneath ledges. You can get by on a trip with a slightly bent Polespear. So that's why I love the aluminum. Granted, you need a really big fish to bend the Big Blue, a 3/4 inch diameter aluminum. And this is all, 6 series aircraft aluminum. So that's also where this kind of started, right? My dad was an aviation manufacturer, and so we first started off using his machines to do some of the prototyping and stuff like that. So that was definitely
so that's kind of where you got your engineering background.
Absolutely, yeah. He's my partner.
Okay, cool.
He is the aeronautical engineer. I'm the diver and market expert. So that's the combination of teamwork right there. So really like that. But one of the things we really wanted was a modular Polespear. Again, if a section bent, you could grab a new one. You could break it down into different sizes, right? One of the things that I like doing is I like using a 10-foot spear when I'm diving 40 feet or deeper. If I'm diving shallower than 40 feet, I like an 8-foot Polespear.
Right.
It's a little bit more maneuverable. And sometimes when you have a fish up underneath a ledge, even 8 feet isn't is too much, right?
For sure.
So we wanted a modular butt piece. Let me grab this. And the reason why we wanted this modular butt piece is because you can actually take it off and unscrew it from here and go ahead and put it all the way to this front section right here. What that does now is it gives you a 5-foot Polespear, a shorty, if
right.
you will, and it allows you to get up and underneath. And sometimes the way that those angles are, all you need to do is get a shot into the fish. Once
right.
you get a shot into the fish, he might move, or you can start finessing him out.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
You know, I've seen people use gaffs before, so that was sort of, you know, gaffs can sometimes slip if the fish moves off the hook or whatever.
Right.
Once you get them with a slip tip and it toggles,
it's hard to exactly. to beat. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted this. And it actually segued later on for some of our future developments, which worked out perfectly.
Let's talk a little bit about this guy right here. What's going on in this middle section?
Yes. So these grooves, one, are a standard grip place, right? You can hold on to these. It is a little bit more difficult, so we recommend that you grab one of these kits, and you can place it wherever you want, right? If you like your hand to be held here rather than further up, you can place it wherever you want, right? It definitely makes it easier. But the other thing about this is when you're not using it as a grip, it actually creates laminar flow, physical oceanography coming out. When you see some of the ripples in the sand, that's there because of laminar flow and the way that boundary layers are created by currents. And so it actually makes this sphere faster in the water when you have these grooves like this.
Really? Mm-hmm. So it's not actually catching the water as you send it through, it's actually helping it.
It's creating a boundary layer, kind of like how eddies and stuff, you can get behind eddies and it doesn't create that drag.
Taught me something new. That's cool. Awesome. So yeah, so like you said, it's not only for a functional purpose of gripping, but it's also helping the pole glide faster. Interesting. Let's go all the way up to the front and talking about your tip system here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what's going on? We got a pigtail on top of a cable loop. Mm-hmm. What's the thought process there?
One of the things I used to use was the standard run the cable up through this loop here and up and around. It wasn't until I started shooting fish and inject massive fish, right, 50, 60, 70 pound fish, and the injector rods themselves would snap. When you put it up and through this, the only thing holding your slip tip is the injector rod. Once your injector rod snaps, that fish swam away, and it happened actually twice on me on a 100+ pound cubera. And so I cry about it at night sometimes.
Was it the same cubera?
Same cubera, twice in the face.
No way.
And it happened, correct.
Dang.
Yeah. And so I hit him, I plugged him, I was like, this is great.
Right.
And then I see him swimming away with a slip tip engaged in his cheek and the cable. And I thought he popped the cable.
Right.
I thought, I was like, oh, I crimped it bad, you know?
Yeah.
And I started kicking myself, you know, man, you know how to crimp. You do thousands of crimps.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that. What it was that it snapped the injector rod. And so I, you know, grabbed another Polespear real quick and chased him down. Took me 45 minutes to find him. Plugged him again. Snapped it again, right? So I'm sitting here saying, why is this happening?
Right.
So then I came up with this. The swivel, what's nice about it is if you have it, for example, in a fish underneath a ledge or something, sometimes you don't have the extra cable to go up and all the way over sometimes, right? To get it off. Sometimes you only have 2 or 3 inches of free line.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of the way that you've shot this fish. So that was
that
the
engaged slip tip, and then
with the new engaged slip tip on the second shot, correct? So that was the big thing about this, and that's why I wanted to do it. Obviously, it's easy sometimes too when you're trying to boat a fish. You can literally take the fish off, still have your hand wrap it on the cable, so that the fish, if it starts to swim away a little bit, you can still kind of pull it in, right? And then you can easily grab the fish by the gills, pull the slip tip out, throw the fish on the boat, keep doing what you're doing, because as we all know, sometimes when it's on, and that time taken to get on the boat, take the fish off, and
perform
whatever.
surgery to get the tip out.
Exactly. And that's actually a great point. I didn't even, you know, it was part of my design, but you know, the idea of being able to pull it out rather than having to, you know, perform surgery, again, saves time, gets you back in the water, because when the currents are on and the visibility is on and the fish are there, you really don't want to be spending time on the boat watching all your friends shoot fish.
Right. Or messing with your gear, right? Trying to like dial it in. So,
exactly.
So yeah, really cool connection point there. And two, if you don't want to use the pigtail, you've got the cable loop here, so you can still run it the same way. Let's say you're shooting smaller fish and you don't want to mess with the pigtail, that's perfectly fine. But if you are going for that bigger fish, right, that pigtail is there for exactly that reason.
This swivel is 450 pound, so pretty heavy duty.
Break it.
Pretty heavy duty. And then this coated cable right here is 800 pounds, and it's 7x7. So very, very strong. The coated, you know, if you see on typical uncoated cable, eventually it starts to kink. But what we did with the coated cable is make sure that this lasted you more than, you know, a season or two. We do recommend that every once in a while you change it out, right? I mean, it's always nice to come by. You know, Florida Freedivers has an awesome shop right here. You bring it by their gunsmith or Polespear smith, and they'll go ahead and swap you out and make sure you're ready to go for your next trip.
Absolutely. So continue to move forward, right? Talking about this long injector rod, right? So a lot of the Polespears that are out there kind of cut this thing almost in half. So what's the deal? Why do we have such a massive injector rod?
So we wanted to, when we first started 4 years ago, Polespears weren't what they are today, right? There's tons of brands today that built incredible Polespears that are very durable. At the time, we wanted an expendable piece. Something that if something was to be underneath a rock, you have 2 feet of something that's in a ledge where preferably this is what bends, not your extra sections, right? The other
choosing like the worst of, or the best of all evils, right? If I'm going to break something, I want something cheap and inexpensively replaced to break.
Exactly. Or bend or whatever. And even then, I've seen people take bent injector rods and bend them back for if you're on your last one or whatever, right? If it's not like an elbow, right? If it's an elbow, it's done. I'm sorry. You know, turn it into a gaff. I've done that a couple times.
There you go.
But that was a thought. And other thing is, you know, large fish. If you're shooting a fish perfectly perpendicular to the fish, even the larger 50, 60 pound groupers, they're maybe 12 inches wide, 18 inches wide, so you need to be able to get through them. Where those 12-inch injector rods or 18-inch injector rods on the market, those work. They will work, right? Because you need to have enough play for this tip to come off. You need it to at least have that much extra for it to engage, but really you want a little bit more. So the part where we said we need something longer is when you shish kebab a fish. When that fish is quartering away from you, and now you've got to shoot almost 30 inches through a fish because you hit it in the back left near, you know, the lower stomach or the tail, and you're shooting up through the top right shoulder of the fish.
Yeah,
you know,
or the opposite, right? Down through the fish.
Or down through the fish, right? Whatever. Now you're talking about a potential 2-foot long shot that you need to have a much longer. Because if you shoot the fish, and with these big Polespears, they have enough power to literally put a fish all the way back to here, right? You can shoot all the way up onto the grip with it. What that does is it blows a huge hole through the fish, which now the slip tip may not, you know, toggle, or it will toggle, but then it might pull back through eventually. So we wanted as small of a hole in the fish as possible, and then to get rid of any leverage the fish has, which is why we never made a flopper. We only do slip tips, because when you have floppers and things like that, in my opinion, it gives the fish leverage to either rip itself out or again, put your Polespear under more stress than it needs to be.
Right. No, that's a great point, right? So talking about just kind of the idea behind that, right, is that when you have a slip tip and it's attached, when your fish gets shot and this toggles on your fish is fighting cable, right? And this cable can get tied in multiple knots before it's ever going to, well, it's not really going to fail, even if it's tied in knots, right? You're going to have to really mess this thing up for it to fail. And so that's kind of like that same leverage point you're talking about. When you look at a straight flopper, and if you hold that back section and I hold this front section, right, and we bent it one way, that would be really easy to do. But I could walk around the whole store with this thing and be perfectly fine, right?
Exactly.
Which is just the big difference.
So, sometimes, you know, a couple weekends ago, I was on a trip and I watched, we ended up landing a 50-pound cubera. Nice. I watched Gavin shoot this cubera at point blank, and then I watched this fish swim in and out of 3 different reefs. And what's nice about that is, again, the Polespear had enough maneuverability that it could find its way in and out of all the reefs because it had the slip tip system. And so
it has that long cable on it too.
Exactly. The one thing I will say though, if you're going to put this through like this, like how some people do, notice that it shortens up the cable. So if you're going to do this, you might want to carry extra cable for yourself. Right now this would still work. You still have about 3 or 4 inches of play. But when you do it on the coated cable and the pigtail swivel, you actually get an extra 3 inches. So now your distance is much further. Again, because you want this to go all the way through the fish, and you want to be able to pull this injector rod out of the fish, right? Because if the injector rod's still in the fish, we lose the point of the slip tip.
It still is giving them leverage.
Exactly.
It's still giving them leverage.
And letting them wallow out this massive hole, particularly in those big groupers. If you hit them in that stomach cavity area, I mean,
super soft tissue, and
exactly.
they'll go nuts until they get off. Probably one of the most important parts, right? The slip tip design. So obviously some other companies are out there that have magnets, but you've obviously got the magnet on yours. It's kind of actually uncommon. There's only, I think, you and maybe one other guy who's doing the magnetic tip thing, but yours is very different. So kind of tell me what's going on with this whole magnetic tip thing.
Absolutely. So we were not the first person to invent the magnet, and we were not the first person to come up with a magnetic tip. I think it was about 10, 15 years ago. There's a guy by the name of Hamilton, Spear Guns. He actually had a magnetic slip tip, and then I like the idea. You know, there's other Polespears on the market, that, like you mentioned, who do have a magnetic slip tip, and I like that. The reason why I like magnetic slip tips is simply because when you have to use a rubber band to hold this slip tip on, if that rubber band breaks or you run out of them, you're rendered useless unless you have some tape on the boat and you can tape.
Right, you're MacGyvering at that point.
Exactly, exactly.
Which we've all done, but it'd rather not have to do it, right?
We've been there. And so I really wanted it to be on. One of the great things about this is it's not going anywhere.
Right,
And so that was important to me. One thing that some people still liked about the rubber band system is that it holds it tight. So some people, if you wanted to, you can add an O-ring to keep this line tight and more streamlined. For me, it doesn't bother me too much to have it like dangling like this. But one of the things we wanted to do on the tip was we wanted it to toggle in one direction all the time. So no matter what, based on the way this is, it's going to toggle on this side. The reason why it's going to toggle on this side is because the orientation of the way that we crimp it, as well as the tongue. Or flange, tongue, flange, there's a bunch of different words for it. Wings. We only wanted one wing. The reason why we wanted one wing is because, again, we want to minimize the hole that we're making. The smaller the hole, the smaller the incision, the more likely it's going to get stuck. If my fingers were long like this, you can see where it might possibly rip through. So we actually wanted a longer slip tip than what was on the market, again, 4 years ago, right? Things have changed since then. But at the time, it was the longest slip tip on the market, and it provided that good toggle. The other thing that we wanted was a pentacut. We wanted this thing to be razor sharp. I mean, you mentioned
I cut myself this morning.
So we wanted to make sure if we did touch a fish that it was actually penetrating that fish. So we actually went ahead and put hollow point grooves similar to bow and arrows and things like that, right? And so these are actually cut at an angle that they're actually sharp themselves. If you rub your fingers on these grooves, you can actually cut yourself as well. So once the penetration starts, we wanted it to continue cutting away at the flesh all the way until it got to the toggle point. Once it gets to the toggle point, we want the cutting of flesh to stop.
Right.
You know, and that's why we had it, tapered off, smaller, a little bit thicker. And again, this is all hardened, so that's why it has the color that it does.
A little purplizing.
Exactly.
To it,
That's from the heat treating to make sure that this is as hard as possible, because we don't want it to bend when you accidentally hit a rock, which you shouldn't, but it happens.
But it happens. It happens. That grouper moves or whatever case may be.
Exactly. And then the other thing is we wanted to taper down this because, again, we wanted that thin slip tip. If this was a 5/16 all the way through, this slip tip would have no choice but to be bigger than 5/16 so that it could fit on the top. So we built this birthday cake layered tip that everyone sees, and so it sits on there perfectly. And when you look straight down it right here, it only has that one little ridge. I mean, we're talking centimeters, but it's more than enough if you do this over and over again. It's going to come off every time.
Right.
So that's why we did it like that.
I know that I've shot quite a few fish on it. I know you and your team have landed a ton of awesome fish. So we'll put up some pictures there of the really cool fish that you guys have shot. But you had the big blue, and it was going well. And then you introduced something a little bit different, right? You brought in this thing called the Bantam. So tell me a little bit about the blue Bantam and what's different.
Right. So, like you mentioned, it was going really well, but it was strictly used for very, very large fish, and not everyone is consistently targeting that trophy fish. Sometimes people are just going out to have fun and grab a couple fish for the cooler.
Me most of the time, yeah.
or maybe even just because you are starting off, right? You're starting off, you're going shallow. I personally use both.
Right.
And it's all use case dependent. Or if you're in the blue water and you're trying to chase some of those more skittish fish, this was sort of the development. So maybe a year and a half later, we decided to come out with a 5/8 version, which was the Bantam, kind of like Bantam weight. It still packs a punch, but it's lightweight, right? So that was the thought process behind that name. But what we did is we actually made this tip right here, which has the O-rings here so that it doesn't back off, right? It gives it a nice little squeeze. But we also have this layering of a pilot and a thread as well, so that it has a very sturdy connection point. At the time, we actually had a much smaller connection point on the Big Blue.
Right, it was like face to face basically with thread, female and male thread, but it was no shouldering, right? It was just stopping straight on.
So we actually came out with this, and we started landing 40-pound fish with the Bantams.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, well, this exceeded expectations.
Right.
Not only were we able to use a lightweight spear that was you could again bring down shorter for some of that 20-30 foot diving in the Bahamas. But it was still landing really big fish. So I decided that we were going to make Big Blue 2.0, which was what you see now, where they are the exact same type of thread.
Same design, yeah.
But again, obviously just scaled, right? One is for the 5/8, one is for 3/4. And so now both of them carry the same style, like you mentioned, with that shoulder or pilot that actually helps take some of that load when it is being stressed on that connection point.
Nice. Very cool, man. Well, lots of thought apparently has gone into this, the whole Neritic thing, and it's been awesome having you on the channel, man. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with our viewers all the cool stuff. Obviously, you guys can come and check it out on our website, flfreedivers.com. If you did find value in this content, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. I see a bunch of you guys watching our videos that aren't subscribed yet, so hit that subscribe button, and
right down there.
and we will see you guys in the next one.
Thank you guys for watching. If you are into freediving and spearfishing like we at Florida Freedivers are, you can check out any of the other videos you see on the screen. And if you have any questions about freediving, spearfishing, or any of the products you've seen in any of our videos or any other products, you can give us a call here at the shop and we'll be happy to answer them for you.